fact, as you suggest, Hamas was not threatening Israel with rockets and tunnels. So I guess it's a three-part question. In what interest does Israel have to, as you say, mow the lawn every 2 years if Hamas is not actually threatening them? And two, if they needed a pretense to go in, and that pretense were just the rockets or fireworks, why would Hamas fire the fireworks and give them the pretense? And three, if they were just fireworks, then how did those 7 people get killed from fireworks?
Well, the last question is easy. If you're an American, you know on the 4th of July, a few people get killed from fireworks. That happens every 4th of July. That's why we have laws banning the use of fireworks.
What you like, but you refer to them as fireworks.
Yes, they were basic. Well, you asked 2 more questions, and I don't want to ignore them. But on the third question, I think the burden of evidence, the burden of proof is on your side, not mine. You would have to explain to me, how is it possible that 7,000 rockets and mortars can only destroy 1 house? How is that possible? Now, that's the official Israeli number. If I had a screen in front of me, I would show you the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. And actually, I copied it down here for something I'm writing. They have, it's not so long, so I'm going to go through it. Bear in mind, 7,000 rockets and mortars. This is what they say. July 8th, property damage. July 9th, building near kindergarten hit. July 11th, 1 house completely destroyed, 2 others damaged. July 13th, rocket hits Israeli electrical plant, supplying power to Gaza. July 15th, significant damage to cars and property, school for special needs children hit. 16th, house damage. 17th, house damage. 18th, kindergarten and synagogue damaged. 19th, massive damage in residential area. 21st, house hit, building damaged. 22nd, house damaged. 27th, 2 houses hit. August 3rd, school grounds hit. August 5th, house hit. August 8th, house hit. August 19th, shopping center hit. August 21st, building hit. August 27th, house and synagogue hit. August 26th, house and playground hit. That's it. That's the total damage. For large numbers of days, nothing. They'll say 150 rockets fired. Nothing. 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 Ask yourself a simple question. How is that possible? How can you have 5,000 rockets, 2,000 mortar shells, 1 house destroyed, 11 hit or damaged? How is that possible? How could you only have $20 million in property damage? I live on Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. Each house next to me, I live in the apartment building, modest. Each house next to me is $5 million. 4 houses hit, that's $20 million. 5,000 rockets, how can it be? So I think the burden of proof is on your side. How could that be unless these are not rockets? How could it be 2001 to 2014, 14,000 rockets and mortar shells? That's Israel's official figure. No Iron Dome. Iron Dome is first deployed in November 2012 during Pillar of Defense. 23 Israeli civilians killed, Israel's official figure. B'Tselem tallied it. That's 1 civilian for every 700 rockets and mortar shells. How is that possible if it's a rocket? No, really. How is it possible? 1 for every 700 rockets and mortar shells? 1? No. It's not credible. Unless we're talking about fireworks. Then it's credible. On 4th of July, yeah, about 6 people get killed from fireworks in our country. Yes, there are 2 other questions. The first question is, why does why does Israel attack? And then you have to, as I said at the beginning, the devil is in the details. You have to look at, in each case, what happened. In the case of Operation Cast Lead, the reasons were very clear. Israel didn't hide the reasons. Number one, they were very upset by the defeat they suffered in July, August 2006 during during the assault on Lebanon. They suffered a major military defeat at the hands of the Hezbollah. And they were determined to teach the Arabs that who only understand the language of force. They were going to teach the Arabs to not get so uppity. Because as you recall, I suspect you know the situation there, Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, kept saying, our divine victory, we defeated the Israelis, and he was rubbing salt into the wounds of the Israelis. Israel didn't want to tangle again with Hezbollah because it realized there was a real problem there. So it looked around for a place to launch an attack. And they said it. There were many statements made that this is that the attack on Gaza was their second chance to set things straight after what happened in 2006 in Lebanon. There's no question who prompted that attack. The record is perfectly clear. There was a ceasefire signed between Hamas and Israel on July 17th, 2008. Israel itself said, and I'm quoting Israel, Hamas was careful, this is their words, Hamas was careful to maintain the ceasefire. How did the ceasefire break down? Every kid knows that one. The ceasefire broke down on November 3rd, U.S. election day. Because, as I said, the Israelis are very media savvy. They knew historic election in the United States, first African-American president, all the cameras are now turned to the United States. So, on November 3rd, Israel attacks Gaza, kills 6 militants, knowing exactly what's going to happen, that it's going to cause a reaction from Hamas, and that's how the war began. There's no mystery about that. Does anyone really think it's a coincidence that Israel broke the ceasefire on election day? It's as much of a coincidence as they launched the ground invasion on the night of the attack on the downing of the Malaysian airliner over the Ukraine. So that was their purpose then. Next was Operation Pillar of Defense. If you recall, at the time of Operation Pillar of Defense, Hamas was on a roll. Sisi was in power in Egypt. Qatar was offering them some $400 billion or $1 million? I can't even remember right now, in aid. And it looked like Hamas was now getting regional respect and authority. It was time to cut them down to size. It's a funny thing when you look at the details. It's funny. Do you know how it started? The Pillar of Defense? It started when Israel assassinated this Hamas official named Jabari. Jabari was at that moment negotiating a long-term ceasefire with Israel. They killed the guy who was negotiating the long-term ceasefire. And then they claim they do it for self-defense. So you have to look in each particular case. I know the details. I've studied it pretty closely and written on it. The second question, because in my opinion, Hamas, I'm not going to get into an argument about it, I'm just going to state it. They are addicted to this idea of armed resistance, that they can somehow bring Israel to its knees through armed resistance. And whenever the opportunity falls into their lap, they try to exploit it in order to see how many casualties they can inflict, because there's this belief that they can replicate the success of Hezbollah in evicting Israel from South Lebanon in May 2000. And there's this idea that they can replicate Hezbollah's 2006 divine victory. In my opinion, that's a complete pipe dream. It's never going to happen. But that's their view. And so they want to show armed resistance works, which is why Israel is as determined to show it's not going to work. That's why they're not going to lift the siege. They won't give Hamas a victory. Yes?
When the Israelis started to bomb the schools where people were holding up, it was the day after they killed the 4 little boys on the beach. I know that the Palestinian Authority was communicating with the Israelis and saying, the people are holed up in this school. And I said, you sure? Yeah, they're holed up in the school. Where is it? And then after they had all those communications like 3 times,
well,
then they bombed it.
But, just on that fact, there's no question about that. As I say, this is a hand-picked report and the final conclusion on the targeting of the schools, the shelters.
Is it the Amnesty report?
No, this is the UN report, the Ban Ki-moon report. I'll just read you the last conclusion. The government of Israel has endeavored to improve its internal structures of communication between COJAT, that's its local coordinating group, and IDF units. The board could not properly assess internal coordinate structures within the IDF, but was briefed on all the mechanisms and measures to ensure that fighting troops were aware of sensitive sites as well as of the humanitarian situation and needs. All coordinates of United Nations installations were available to units on the ground and were clearly and visibly marked on maps. The Commission noted, though, that in spite of such measures, UNRWA facilities were hit. Every single school was, as they said at the very beginning, just give me 1/2 second. Okay. Just one other paragraph. UNRWA sent twice daily communications to Israel's coordinator of government activities in the territories, it's called COJAT, and its other liaisons, coordinates of premises currently being used as designated emergency shelters. All the UNRWA schools involved in the incidents enumerated in the board's terms of reference were included in those communications. They had every coordinate. They knew exactly what they were targeting. No misconstrual at all. And in several cases, they used precision weapons, what are called HEAT, high explosive, I can't remember the acronym, precision weapons. In other cases, they used artillery, the 155 millimeter high explosive artillery shells. They knew exactly what they were doing. That's one of the reasons that the report's so preposterous. Because at the end, they give recommendations. We recommend there should be better coordination. The problem wasn't the lack of coordination. The problem was they were targeting the schools. The pretense that Israel couldn't possibly have targeted, even though all the evidence shows they targeted. All the coordinates were given. Israel, yes, sometimes it showed a real magnanimity. One school they targeted, they gave a warning. This is literally true. I can read it from the report, but that becomes tedious. In one school, they gave a warning. The Mukhtar in the area went to the school and said to the kids in the school, the people holed up in the school, it's a shelter now, so it's not just kids. The people holed up in the school, it said to them, this place is very unsafe, you better evacuate. So they all went downstairs into the schoolyard to evacuate. And what do you think happened? Israel fired mortar shells in the schoolyard. Yeah, that's just a fact. They evacuated, they were terrified of leaving a shelter. Finally, they were convinced, went down into the schoolyard, and Israel fired mortar shells in the schoolyard. If you want me to read the text to you, I will, but you can do it on your own.
I have two questions. Will Netanyahu ever be charged with crimes against humanity? And what happened to change Amnesty's stance?
I think the first question is superfluous. Everybody knows the answer to that. The second question is interesting. What's happening, and it's not just Amnesty. I've been around a long time on this particular topic, Israel-Palestine. And basically, as I see it, what's happening is that Israel's supporters, for the longest time, they tried to carry on in what you might call a liberal fashion. They had public opinion on their side, and so it wasn't so difficult to suppress dissent, suppress the dissenters. But something significant has happened in the last 10 years. Public opinion, in particular liberal public opinion, has shifted radically, and Israel is now much more vulnerable. And Israel acknowledges it's lost the battle for public opinion on college campuses. That's over. And many Israelis will say that. If you read the news, the periodicals. On college campuses, they've lost the battle. And now that they've lost the battle, they've kind of taken off the white gloves, and they're just carrying on in an extremely thuggish fashion, exerting lots of raw pressure and force to try to shut down debate, including all the resolutions now being put forth for divestment. And you see many examples of it. There was the Stephen Saleda case at Illinois, which was just clearly a case of Jewish donors threatening to withdraw money if he's not kicked out. You see it now in an interesting case with Lancet. Lancet is the most prestigious medical journal in the world. And Lancet, during the summer, ran a very tough letter on what Israel was doing by several physicians. And now, 500, which is not a small number, 500 physicians, Nobel laureates, and so forth, are starting to turn the screws on Lancet, demanding that Lancet apologize for printing that letter. They've now gone one step further. These are the people who always denounced the BDS boycott. They now went to Lancet's publisher, Elsevier, which is a publisher of scientific journals. And it publishes about 2,000 scientific journals. And it's threatening, if you don't put pressure on Lancet, we're not going to contribute to any of your scientific journals anymore. That's just pretty brazen thuggishness. And a third case closer to our topic is what happened just last week at Amnesty. There was a resolution put forth that Amnesty should take up as a cause anti-Semitism in the UK. Now, there are fewer things more preposterous than Amnesty International, in the midst of what's going on in the world today, devoting resources to a non-issue like anti-Semitism in the UK. And I've written on the topic, and I'll happily go through all the statistics on what goes on in the UK under the name of anti-Semitism. It was interesting what happened. The resolution was voted down, but only by 10 votes. It was like 660 to 640 on a manifestly preposterous resolution. So you can see in a large number of venues now, a lot of pressure is being brought. It's not the genteel pressure of the past. It's now a pretty raw pressure. You're going to retract that letter, or we're going to bring down Elsevier. You know. And so I think what's happening now is some of the organizations. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Lancet. I'm not so convinced they're going to hold up.
How do you spell that?
Lancet. If you Google it, you'll see the letter that appeared during the summer. Then you'll see the letter by the 500 physicians, medical personnel, and Nobel laureates. And then you'll see the reply. There's another petition. So I think that it's not one step forward, two steps back, but you have to keep in mind that every victory is always, it's very possible to reverse it. And I think now we're entering a tough period. I think they're getting really, really ruthless, and it's going to be a battle. I find Amnesty now uncitable. I always used to cite it, but now the stuff they wrote, it just made my skin crawl. Yes?
Who's bringing pressure to bear on Amnesty?
I think there are, it's hard to say whether people have joined Amnesty in recent years to undermine it from within, which happens. No, that happens. There was a famous case in Israel. There was a guy named Israel Shahak before the time of most people in the room, and he had this Israeli League for Human Rights. And was part of a larger umbrella organization, I can't remember. And the Labor Party told all of its members to join the League in order to destroy it from within. And it's possible there are large numbers of liberal Jews in Amnesty International's UK branch who don't like its reports. But I was really, most people walked away saying, you see, Amnesty voted it down. And I walked away thinking, how did that ridiculous resolution get 640 votes? Yes? Yeah.
Thanks. Could I ask a different question? I mean, I was very moved by how you totally convinced about the rockets. No question. Very moved by the way you used Gandhi, and I read Gandhi that way too. But there's a tension between that idea of sending out flares to the world to say we're dying, and the right of resistance, and the idea that we're going to replicate Hezbollah's victory. There's a tension there.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could ask the question hypothetically, why does Israel not destroy Hamas? Why do they not destroy Gaza entirely?
Because they can. You see, that's one of the things that I think people really get wrong about the Israel-Palestine conflict. This notion that Israel can do whatever it wants, and there are no limits or constraints on how it carries on. That's just factually untrue. I remember once in 2003, I think it was, I met with Rantisi, who was the head of Hamas at the time. I was in Gaza, and we sat down, we talked for several hours, and it was at the time of the suicide bombings. And I said, you're giving Israel just pretext to carry on. It was during the really brutal repression of the Second Intifada. And his response was, well, Israel doesn't need pretexts. It can do whatever it wants. Well, the answer to that is so obviously not true, what he said. Because if Israel could do whatever it wants, it would expel everybody from the West Bank and Gaza. That's what it wants to do. If it could do anything it wants, that's what it would like to do. Can it do that? Of course not. And then you have to look in each particular situation at what it can do. As I said, during 2000, 14, it had the dilemma. The Goldstone report was a real problem for Israel. Don't kid yourself. Netanyahu said at the time, Israel faces three main threats: Iranian nuclear bomb, missiles from Gaza and Lebanon, and the Goldstone report. They were very worried about that Goldstone report. If you remember, it was at the time when Tzipi Livni could not even go to the UK because there was fear of what's called universal jurisdiction, and that she was going to be arrested. It was a real problem for them. Israel calibrates the limits. The idea that they can do as whatever they want, and they say, we don't want to occupy Gaza again. It wasn't easy to control Gaza. That's why they left in 2005. It was not easy to control Gaza. So there are limits. Now, they went further than I would have thought during Operation Protective Edge, but there were circumstances. They were able to do it. There were new, again, you have to look at the details. There was the new regional realignment. That had a big effect. If you recall, during Operation Pillar of Defense, most of you people in the room probably don't even know it, in November 2012. It was all over in 1 week. And you know why it ended so quickly? In part, it was because Gaza had two significant regional allies at the time. It had Turkey and it had Egypt. Both Erdogan and Morsi had communicated to the Obama administration, there's not going to be another Operation Cast Lead. We're not going to let it happen. We have our red lines. And that put real limits on Israel. What happened in 2014? Turkey was effectively aligned with Israel over Syria. And Turkey was focused on Syria now, and effectively aligned with Israel. Egypt, Morsi was gone, Sisi was in, and the new Egyptian regime effectively whipped up a pogrom-like atmosphere against the Palestinians in Egypt. So now there were lesser constraints. No constraints? No, that's not true. There were constraints. I'll give you another example, which some of you you might not be familiar with. White phosphorus. Israel used the white phosphorus in 2008-9. Remember, it dropped white phosphorus on a school, on a humanitarian warehouse, on a marketplace, on two hospitals. White phosphorus reaches a temperature of 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 800 degrees Celsius. It did not use white phosphorus after 2008-9. I think it was largely because of the human rights reports. The U.S. State Department told them that's out. Cluster bombs. Israel dropped on Lebanon in 2006 4.6 million. 4.6 million cluster bomblets on South Lebanon. 90% of them, they dropped in the last 72 hours of the war when the war was already over. It was over. There was a UN resolution. Condoleezza Rice had blocked it for the 31 days. Finally, when it looked like Israel was in a mess in Lebanon, she bailed them out by getting the resolution passed. On the 31st day, the war was over. The last 72 hours, Israel dropped about 4 million cluster bomblets in South Lebanon. And if you're interested in it, just look at the Human Rights Watch report, Flooding South Lebanon. Why do I mention it? They never again used the cluster bomblets. Again, I think it was because of the documentation of the human rights reports. The message was communicated to Israel, you can't do it anymore. Limits are placed. Not the kind of limits we would like, but it's also, I think, untrue or inaccurate to say Israel can do whatever it wants. No, it cannot. Yeah. But it can't wipe out Hamas either. Because wiping out Hamas means wiping out the people of Gaza. During each war, afterwards, opinions shift. when the destruction is seen. But during the attack, overwhelmingly, the people supported Hamas. To wipe out Hamas, you'd have to wipe out the people of Gaza. As I said afterwards, yes, when they see they got nothing for it, the blockade is still there, then people have second thoughts about the value of the resistance. But in the course of it, it was pretty united. I'm told I have to wrap up because the building, I guess the room has to be emptied out. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Norman, and thank you all for coming. He has books for sale.